Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, officers, NCOs, and cadets of the Mid-Atlantic region, U.S. Air Force Auxiliary Civil Air Patrol. My name is Lieutenant Paul Douglas, and I'm the Aerospace Education Officer for Burke Composite Squadron in Northern Virginia. And on behalf of all of Virginia Wing, I'd like to welcome you to this very special edition aerospace meeting. Soon, and by soon I mean the second half of next year, the U.S. will be landing a spacecraft on the surface of the moon for the first time since the early 1970s and the close of NASA's Apollo program. Now, nearly half a century later, a private company by the name of Astrobotic, based in nearby Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is making preparations to send their Peregrine Lunar Lander to our nearest celestial neighbor, what has been called Earth's eighth continent. And today, we're proud and honored to welcome the man who's leading that effort, Astrobotic's Mission Director, Sharad Bhaskaran. Mr. Bhaskaran is a space industry veteran. He serves as the head of Astrobotic's Planetary Lander Department and is leading Astrobotic Mission 1. Prior to Astrobotic, he has 25 years of experience in Lockheed Martin, successfully developing and managing payload projects for spaceflight applications, and he led negotiation and testing for more than 30 U.S. payloads onto the Mir space station. During his time at Lockheed, he was the program manager for the West Coast portfolio, which included NASA Ames Research Center programs and projects, engineering and science services contract, and shuttle operations support contracts at Armstrong Flight Research Facility and White Sands Space Harbor. He supported the International Space Station Human Research Facility in various project and leadership roles, contributing to successful launch and operations of the system on board ISS. He began his career at Lockheed Martin as a payload systems engineer, where he performed Space Lab payload structural analysis for 3 integrated racks that flew and operated on shuttle missions SLS-1 and SLS-2. Mr. Bhaskaran, we're so grateful to you for taking time out of your busy day to come and talk to us. And by the way, we congratulate you for the delivery of the Cube rover to NASA, yet another success story for your company. Welcome.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen to our story. We're super excited, always excited to share our story with everybody and as many people as possible. So I'm the mission director here at Astrobotic. I've been here for 4 years after spending a great deal of time at Lockheed Martin. And I've been directing Peregrine Mission 1, which is our first lunar lander mission for Astrobotic. So it's a super exciting mission. Always excited to talk about it. I wanted to kind of introduce, why we're doing what we're doing here at Astrobotic. This is kind of a slide showing you what the space missions have been for the past few decades. I wanted to focus on the spacecraft that have gone to the moon. 65 spacecraft, 14 days of time have been spent on the lunar surface. I highlighted the 6 nations because only nations have gone to the moon. The United States, NASA, Russian Space Agency, Chinese Space Agency, and so forth. We are trying to become the first private company to land a spacecraft on a celestial body. So that's what really is the motivation here. Why the moon? A variety of reasons. The moon is our nearest neighbor, and we believe that it is most appropriate for us to learn how to live on the moon, adapt to conditions on the moon, take resources from the moon and use those for propellant to try to figure out how to live off the moon itself. Because there has been discovery of water ice on the moon, that would serve as potential propellants for future spacecraft. Launching from the moon is a much lower energy than launching from Earth due to the lack of much of a gravitational field. So we're anticipating fuel depots. There's mining to be done, a lot of minerals and metals on the moon as well. Manufacturing, we would like to be able to set up our own bases on the moon. Exploration research, recently there were pits and caves discovered on the moon. These are of significant interest to human exploration because those pits and caves are pretty extensive and they offer natural shielding from micrometeorites and radiation and can be a much more controlled thermal environment. So one recent article said that a cave was discovered that is large enough to house the city of Philadelphia. So a very large cave that could be used for habitation. And we would have to use, hydroponics, some sort of system to grow plants. Although in one experiment some years ago, they actually proved that using lunar regolith combined with a little bit of soil can actually be used to grow crops. So there's some of that regolith on the surface can be used as a starting point. And ultimately, we want to be a multi-plant species. there's always a human desire to explore and to colonize into new worlds, and so this is the first opportunity to prove you can do that. And so the moon is the best destination for us to do that. So why are we in business? We're in business because traditionally lunar missions are very expensive. To do it through a government agency is on the order of $300 million, and there's a lot of politics associated with flying with one of those national missions, space agency missions. So what we're doing is we're lowering that price. So our service is $1.2 million per kilogram to the surface of the Earth. So for the moon, we are open to sending payloads for anyone, international space agencies, academic institutions, as well as NASA, which we are flying payloads for NASA. So the idea here is to lower the cost of space exploration to where virtually anybody can afford it. And to that end, we actually have a service called DHL Moonbox, which is a small box on our spacecraft where you can actually, for as little as I think $430, you can buy a little space and put something in that in Moonbox. We've already had many signed customers, and that kind of lets everyone into this kind of lunar club. And if you go to our website, you can actually see how to purchase one of those little moon boxes for your own. You can send little pictures or mementos, whatever, and you can say once we land, you can say you have a permanent presence on the moon. So how do we do it? This is our basic approach. Our corporate sponsor is DHL, the Worldwide Shipping Agency. They would ship payloads from around the world to our headquarters here at Astrobotic here at Pittsburgh. We would then integrate the spacecraft here in Pittsburgh, and I have some pictures later that show you our new, some renderings of our new spacecraft assembly facility in Pittsburgh. And then we send everything, the spacecraft fully integrated, down to Kennedy Space Center, where we'll launch Mission 1 on a ULA's Vulcan launch vehicle. So we integrate with them, and then we send, they give us a boost to the moon. Once we separate from the launch vehicle, we're a single stage spacecraft all the way to the lunar surface, where we then can, for one lunar day, which is equivalent to about 14 Earth days, we can provide power and comms to payloads that want to do science. These are a variety of payloads, as you can see: rovers, science payloads, in situ resource utilization payloads, power and communication. We can deploy payloads in orbit. So there's a lot of uses for these type of this type of delivery service. And so, for example, a rover would actually deploy from the spacecraft and then do its traversing, and they would use our spacecraft as a Wi-Fi communication hub. So through Wi-Fi, they send data back through our spacecraft, and we send it back to Earth through the ground stations. So and payloads that are staying on the spacecraft will get power and data from the spacecraft itself. So it's a delivery service. It's essentially like a workhorse for the space program. We are not flying humans. This is strictly a robotic spacecraft. The human program is coming up in future years under the NASA's Artemis program. So our first, our first big mission. This is one I'm directing, Mission 1 Peregrine in 2021. The landing site is in the kind of northeast quadrant of the face of the moon that we see. The location is called Lacus Mortis. For those of you who know Latin, it translates to Lake of Death. Probably not the ideal place for us to go as far as a first destination, but hey, if we can make it to the Lake of Death, we can make it anywhere, right? So we have 16 customers, including NASA, commercial customers. This is a $79.5 million NASA award to deliver their payloads to the surface of the moon. And so what you see there, the images are CAD rendering of the spacecraft. And I'll show you more about the spacecraft itself. But what you're really seeing on that kind of deck that's juts out in front, all those things that are attached to the deck are the payloads, the science payloads. So those will collect information on the regolith, on electric fields, radiation fields, even the dust environment around the spacecraft. And all that is used to, again, collect science data. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to lead the way for the future human exploration. this is a way of characterizing different locations on the moon, characterizing the environment, determining if there is water or ice under the surface, because those are locations that the human missions want to go to establish bases and begin more exhaustive operations there. So this is the first stage in enabling those capabilities. And so again, this is an image of the lander. And then our second big program at Astrobotic is Moon Ranger, which is a rover. 2022, it's going to land in the South Pole. This is another NASA contract we have. This is actually developed in a different department of Astrobotic, so this is not something I directly manage, but the idea is that Peregrine, the lander, is enabled or is capable of actually delivering this rover to the moon. So it's kind of I would say Astrobotics is building the infrastructure and the ecosystem by providing landers, rovers, and other technologies to support all these investigations. The third mission, which we won here in June of this year, a big mission, is Griffin. And this is a landing site of the South Pole. And this will deliver NASA's Viper rover to the South Pole. And the rover will then go off and do its own mission. This is another big contract win for Astrobotic, $199.5 million award. So under this NASA program, Astrobotic has won 2 of the big contracts. And we're pretty proud of the fact that NASA has selected us not just for one product line, Peregrine, but also the second product line, which is the Griffin, which you see right there. So there you see the rendering of the Griffin. On top, you can see the NASA's Viper rover, and what you see on the side there are the rails, and those rails will deploy once we land on the surface. The rover will deploy, and then, like I said, it is capable of doing its own science. It's capable of sustaining itself. So it has its own comm system, power generation. So our only really function on this mission is to deploy the Viper and then let it do its own mission. So again, these are the 2 major lander product lines that are within my department. And so I want to focus though on Peregrine Mission 1, which is what I'm leading. Here is a kind of more description of the mission. We're launching in 2021. The primary objective is to land successfully on the moon. Again, no private company has ever done this before, so the successful landing is a major objective of us and our customers. So we're going to be delivering NASA and commercial payloads. And once we get to the surface, we provide 10 kbps per kilogram of comm service and 1 watt per kilogram for power. As I mentioned before, there's different payload objectives. Some are just imagery, just taking images of the surface and the horizon, taking field measurements, electrical measurements, radiation measurements, dust measurements, so characterizing the environment. This also allows scientists to do technology demonstrations if they want to see how a new technology performs on the surface, like things like drills and deployers and other things that would be used. This is a way to test those out. And finally, there's a marketing aspect. We do have actual payloads that are flying with us that are simply marketing devices, and some people are sending human ashes to the surface of the moon in those moon boxes. So a lot of different motivations to send items to the moon. So as you can see here, this is kind of the major components of spacecraft. On the top, you can kind of see the solar panel. When we are in cruise toward the moon, we will be pointing that solar panel toward the sun in order to be able to generate power during the entire cruise event. The only times we don't point to the sun are when we're doing propulsive maneuvers, where we need to be more pointed in the direction of the moon. So then we'll use our attitude control thrusters you see on the upper left. Those are used to orient the spacecraft. So reorient the spacecraft in the velocity vector and then fire the main engines. When we've achieved the proper position velocity, then we will reorient the spacecraft using the ACS thrusters toward the sun again, once again to generate power. The comm system, you can see on the left, the medium gain antenna, that is used on the surface. The low gain antennas, which you can kind of see one of those patch antennas pointed on the upper left. There's 3 of those. Those are low gain antennas that we use during cruise to mainly do commanding of the spacecraft, but also to send back data During cruise, there's really not a lot of payload data that's sent back. It's more spacecraft data. So we'll be using those again for communications. On the left, you see the medium gain antenna. So once we land on the surface, we will then deploy that. There's a little bit of an arm that stretches out so the antenna can get a lock on the Earth. And so once we're on the surface, we use a medium gain antenna to communicate with the ground station, and then we'll be sending back all the really high bandwidth data that all the science payloads need to transmit back to Earth. Because after we land, much of the spacecraft subsystem, not like the propulsion system, doesn't need to be used anymore. The arrow I have on the radiators, really, those are panels we use to dissipate heat. In space, it's extremely cold on the surface of the moon because there is no environment. There's no atmosphere. There's nothing to prevent extreme cold and heat, and so we need to dissipate heat. And so what you see is the radiators. On the inside of the radiators is where we house our main components, like the command and data handling unit, the transponders, the batteries. All those things will be housed inside there. And so when they generate heat, the heat gets dissipated through those radiators. The landing legs, 4 of them have contact sensors. So once we land, there's a sensor that trips, and once the sensor trips, that's when the main engines get cut off. So that's when we confirm landing. The WLAN antenna is, of course, the Wi-Fi antenna for communicating with rovers and other deployed payloads. We have 5 main engines, and these engines are undergoing testing right now. The main thing I'll point out about the engines is they're new engines, and they're being developed for deep space applications. So NASA, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, they're very interested in using these engines for missions to Europa and other destinations in the solar system. So we are testing these engines out for NASA, essentially. The launch vehicle cone adapters are where we attach to the launch vehicle adapter. The fuel is pretty much a standard combination of hydrazine and oxidizer. MON-25 is a variant of the oxidizer that is being flown for deep space applications. So we're not using anything revolutionary here in terms of fuel. And then inside, so you see one of the tanks right there. There's 3 more around the perimeter of the spacecraft, and then you will see, what you can't see is a helium tank in the center of the spacecraft, and the helium tank actually is a pressure for the fuel. So that's the way that the fuel is fed through the feed system into the engines for combustion. The payload decks, there's 2, one on either side. As you saw in the picture before, those where we attach the payloads that will do the science. We also have the ability to attach payloads to the outside of those enclosures as well. But because those enclosures are used to dissipate heat, we kind of prefer to leave them pretty empty. So as I mentioned, our landing site is called Lacus Mortis. There you see the little the flag there on the left side showing where it is on the lunar surface. Of course, the same face as the moon is what we see from Earth. And so this is the location. The reason we selected this is there is actually a cave of interest near this destination, but more importantly, this is a very large flat plain. And so given that the primary objective of Mission 1 is to land safely, we want to land somewhere where there's not a lot of obstacles. So you can see in that area, there's not a lot of obstacles, and we hope to find a nice safe spot with low slopes and not a lot of obstacles and boulders. A little bit of an overview. We carry about 90 kilograms of payload to the lunar surface, or that's the capability. I mentioned the landing site. We can also deploy payloads in orbit. We are not doing that for Mission 1, but we can for future missions. The duration can vary. It really depends on the timing of the launch. We could get to the moon as quickly as about 17 days, but it could be up to 45 days as well. So we don't really know that until we have the final trajectory analysis and mission design work done. And on the surface, as I mentioned also, 1 lunar day is equivalent to 14 Earth days, but we expect to get 8 to 10 Earth days of actual science operations, which is about 192 hours. So the challenge is when you get to lunar night, it gets extremely cold. and so our electronics can't survive the night. And so for future missions, we are going to look to add capability to survive the lunar night. Some previous missions, like Russian missions and the Chinese mission more recently, have survived lunar night because they use a radioisotope to keep the primary electronics of the spacecraft warm. Flying a radioisotope or getting approvals is quite a process, and so at some point I think we'll have to figure out how to do that commercially. But right now it's really out of the scope of what we can do. A quick representation of the mission phases. Pre-launch is all the activity we do down at KSC to get the spacecraft ready, integrated onto the launch vehicle. We launch unpowered on top of the rocket, and once we separate from the launch vehicle, or like I said, we are then a fully autonomous single-stage spacecraft. So we will make what we call one phasing loop, which is the first loop you see, and that is really giving us time to check out the spacecraft, see how it performs. So we will come back around the Earth one time, and then the second time we go out, we'll be essentially in lunar capture. So when the moon comes around, it'll capture us into its gravitational field. We'll do 3 orbits. The first one is just a capture orbit, very short duration. LOI-2 is the primary stable orbit. We'll stay there for a while, again, to check out our spacecraft, our landing sensors and our systems. And then we'll go down to LO3, which is the 100-kilometer circular orbit. From that orbit is really when we're waiting for the landing site to come into daylight. And so depending on timing, of course, like I said, it could be up to maybe 28 days before the landing site comes into sunlight. So that last orbit is really just preparation for descent operations and landing. So a really quick kind of summary of the communications. We are using NASA's JPL Deep Space Network as our ground station. They have 3 dishes, one in Spain, one in Australia, and one in California. So we'll be using those dishes to communicate to the spacecraft, and we're using expand, uplink, and downlink. And as you can see there on the top, as I mentioned, any deployed payloads like rovers would communicate by Wi-Fi to the spacecraft, and then we send the signal and the data back through to the ground station. And once, so also here in Pittsburgh, we actually operate the mission from here, which is, even though spacecraft launches from Kennedy, we actually have mission control here in Pittsburgh. So we're actually set up, we actually have developed a mission control center here in Pittsburgh. So once we get the data from the DSN ground stations, it'll come back through our MCC, and then we will distribute data to the payload mission control centers around the world, wherever they are. Just a quick timeline of events. On the lower left, where you see the STM manufacturing, that's a structural test article. We actually had a successful test of that recently, and in fact, we had a press release about it. If you go to our website, you can see the pictures. This is a flight-like representation of the spacecraft, so it's full scale. It's actually sitting in our building right now as a kind of a media prop. And then right below that, next to that, you see the structural test. That's where we had it on the vibration test stand. We did vibration testing, we did acoustics testing, we did shock testing, and the entire campaign was pretty successful. So we've proven that the spacecraft can get off the launch pad. We've already begun flight system manufacturing. Various components have begun as well. Command and data handling, which is our central processor. We've begun some development testing on that. Our engines have been hot fire tested already. The drop test really is a test where we actually drop the lander suspended off bungees and a crane. We drop it onto a surface that simulates the lunar surface and has the right slopes and boulders, and so we just make sure the landing legs can actually survive the landing. As we go into 2021, we're starting to do mission simulations where we run through all our command sequences, simulate the data coming back from the spacecraft, and then we do payload checkouts, which is all the payloads that I mentioned, the NASA payloads, commercial payloads. We'll be checking all those out at our facility here, doing testing. And then we get into really flight systems integration, where we start assembling the flight spacecraft here in Pittsburgh. So we'll receive all the components from our vendor suppliers. And then we'll start assembling the spacecraft in our clean room, 100K clean room in our building. And then we will take the spacecraft to acceptance testing, then encapsulation in the launch vehicle, launch, landing, and surface operations, as I mentioned before. So a fair amount of activity there, compressed in a fairly short time frame, but it's an aggressive schedule, but it's also a commercial program, so we're not bound by some of the rules and regulations and standards that typical NASA programs are bound to. So Peregrine is a product line, which means that this spacecraft is capable of going to any location on the moon, including polar locations. We could actually go to the far side as well, but we need a relay satellite in orbit to support that. So the idea is that these elements, the primary structure, the guidance navigation, sensors, the power system, avionics, propulsion, thermal control, comms, these are all considered what we call the bus, the spacecraft bus. And around that, you can configure the spacecraft in different ways to accommodate payloads. If we go to different destinations, we may have to move the solar panel from the top of the spacecraft to the sides, things like that, because of the different thermal environments on the moon. So it is, again, capable of going to many destinations. And then mission 2, this is, again, what I mentioned before, the Griffin lander, and there you can see kind of a rendering of the Viper, NASA Viper rover actually rolling off on the rail. And then the objective here is for the Viper mission to survey the surface and subsurface for water ice, so it has a bunch of instruments on it to do that. And as I mentioned before, it helps pave the way for human missions to the surface in 2024. So this will be a 2023 mission. And again, the primary objective of that mission is to deliver that rover successfully. And the polar region is different because it has less sunlight and different angle with respect to Earth. So we have to design a little differently for that. Okay, just some kind of images and renderings of our new headquarters here in Pittsburgh. We're going to have test labs to do electronics testing. On the right there, upper right, you see we're going to actually have a bunch of windows into our clean room, so that the public will be invited to come see us building a spacecraft here in Pittsburgh. And so that'll be kind of neat thing for the city, because the city of Pittsburgh has no real space flight industry here, and so we're really the first to be able to do something this different here in Pittsburgh. So we want to make sure that we open it up to the public and got a chance for people to see what we're doing. The lower right, as I mentioned, is our MCC Mission Control Center. That's where we'll actually run the mission from here in Pittsburgh. And then we have a test article assembly lab. We also have labs to do thermal testing, shaker vibration testing, fluids testing, power testing. So it really is, full spacecraft assembly, integration, test facility. And in fact, we're having a grand opening on the 19th of October, and some local dignitaries and will be in attendance. So we're super excited about moving into this new building. Last few slides, just another some overview. I mentioned Peregrine Griffin. Cube rover is a recent product we delivered to NASA as a qualification unit. The images are a bit outdated here, but it was a major accomplishment for the other team to deliver Cube rover, and that's going to be again one of the rovers that will be used to actually deliver science to the moon as well. Polaris is a large-scale rover that we developed early 2000s. We have not found a customer for it yet, but we're marketing it and advertising it so that so there's capability to deliver much larger payloads to the surface, or on the surface. Then we have some R&D projects. Precision landing is a technology we're actually flying on Peregrine Mission 1. It is to enable us to land in a very small 100-meter ellipse, as opposed to much larger ellipse we're landing in for Mission 1. What that really enables is, if we wanted to go to a specific location, like near a cave or a pit, this would allow us to land near that cave or pit and then deploy like rovers to go into the cave and do some exploration. Mission simulation is really a tool that enables us to do simulations for landing and surface ops. So it kind of allows us to define what a path would be for a rover based on lighting conditions and comms coverage. Autonomous nav is a way to navigate like a drone without in a GPS denied environment. So if we wanted to, again, land near a cave or pit, we wanted to send a drone in there, we would use autonomous nav for the drone to be able to navigate inside the cave. And the team has taken this technology to various caves on Earth to do, again, this type of GPS denied navigation. Space computing is really getting a more reliable computing capability in space environments. So that's a summary. There, once again, you see Peregrine on the left and Griffin on the right. And as I mentioned, Peregrine, we have a full-scale structural test article. It looks pretty much just like that. And it is in our facility here. So we're going to be using that as a showcase to show what it looks like, what a lunar lander looks like. And I believe that concludes my slides. So Paul, if you wanted to open up to questions.
So now we'll go into the Q&A portion of the session. I'll start us off, and then we'll have a couple of cadets who are going to come on camera. I'll introduce them, and then we'll have a few other questions that I'll read off. And so I'll start now with the first question, and that is that the Department of Defense, and in particular the Space Force, has been very public recently about its desire to form a closer relationship with the commercial sector. Do you see any potential partnerships between Astrobotic and DoD?
Yeah, so we have been in contact with DoD recently. There is some interest in our capability, and there's a lot of potential activity in cislunar space in the next 10 years, and so there has been interest in talking about using our platform or a variant of our platform, the Peregrine Lander, to serve different missions that DoD may be interested in. So yeah, absolutely, there's potential here for a multitude of uses: commercial, government, defense, whatever. Our main thing is understanding what the requirements are for the vehicle, and then translating those requirements into a feasible and credible mission.
My second question, and you've already touched on it in your opening segment and also your R&D. Something that fascinates me personally is the Peregrine's landing zone in Lacus Mortis lies in a region near Mare Majoris surrounding the crater Burke, and it's known for a crisscrossing network of rills, or also called lava tubes. There have been also found these skylights, which you've touched on that as well, like the one in Marius Hills. And are you actually going after possibly descending down into one of these skylights?
So I think the way we would do it is we would try to, again, use our precision landing capability to land the spacecraft near one of these destinations of interest. And then we would probably use, again, drones and rovers also developed by Astrobotic or other people as well to, as you mentioned, descend into those skylights and pits and explore on its own, use its own capability. And that's why GPS denied navigation is so important, because once you get inside those caves, well, even outside the cave, it's harder to establish comms, with the ground station on Earth. So when a drone goes in a cave, it would probably be pretty difficult for the drone even to communicate back with the Peregrine Lander because of the depth of the caves, and so they would need to be able to do imaging and everything independently. So the lander itself, probably not, but the other platforms we have would be used to go into those locations.
Okay, next up, we've got a couple of cadets, and I'll start off introducing Cadet First Lieutenant Austin Martin with Burke Composite Squadron, Virginia Wing. Lieutenant Martin is the cadet commander for Burke. And Lieutenant Martin, I invite you now to unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Mr. Bhaskaran, for coming and presenting to us.
Sure.
My question for you today is just, what would you say the best pathway for graduating high schoolers to take in order to get into the private space sector?
So you said graduating high schoolers? Yeah. So if your school offers it in the curriculum, physics, chemistry, obviously advanced mathematics is important. It depends on what you want to do in the space program too. There are a lot of different disciplines that are necessary, not just engineers, but scientists. And so, but to do the engineering work, those are usually the courses you want to take to, set you up for the college curriculum, which would be, of course, more engineering focused. I think some schools now even offer some sort of engineering classes in high school, which is awesome. Certainly wasn't available in my time. But those are the important classes I think you would need to take. And then when you get into college, and even in high school, you can do like internships and co-op things with the companies like ours. Normally, we would actually be in a pretty big, we'd have pretty big internship co-op program. But right now, we're just kind of, we got a lot of work to do, and we've been staffing significantly. We're, moving to a new facility, so we haven't had the ability. And of course, given the pandemic, when we hire interns and co-ops, we like to have them in the work environment, in the office, because they get the most out of working side by side with the engineers. If you try to do it remotely, it's just not as useful. So, but we will, we'll be starting up an internship and co-op program as well. So, you should look for those opportunities. Again, even in high school, we had a couple years ago, we had a couple of high schoolers that were interning with us, I think for a summer. And so they got to do some, look at kind of, how to do some calculations. And so it was a great experience for them, I think. And plus just to see them, for them to be able to see a spacecraft getting built, and tested in real time, when they could participate in that as a high school student, I think it's super cool. So those are kind of opportunities I think you need to look out for.
One of the things that really stuck with me, you and I had a conversation not long ago, and you had pointed out how how young engineers, when they're first starting up with you, they're very early in their careers, and they have an opportunity to have more responsibility than they would have if they were to work for one of the big companies like Lockheed or Boeing, where they might be in the company for 10 or 12 years before they get the kind of responsibility that you're giving your folks. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. And so I was at Lockheed Martin, so I know I can actually speak to this based on experience. At the bigger companies, let me just say they tend to be a little more risk averse. They don't want to put key elements of spacecraft projects in the hands of junior employees, just because the risk of failure is much bigger for those companies, and the negative publicity and all. We're trying to do something revolutionary here, and we need to think outside the box and think differently. And so one of the things I did when I came here was I kind of made the decision that people shouldn't be given key accountable responsibilities just because they got a certain number of years experience under their belt. It should be based on our capability. And so, for example, my lead system engineer on my project is 3 years removed from a master's program, and he came on board as an intern actually, and he very quickly advanced. And you would never see that in a bigger space program. You would never see somebody with that few years out of college being the lead system engineer. It just doesn't happen. So we don't care about the number of years. We care about the capability. We care about the aptitude. We care about people that want to take a responsibility and accountability. So what I mean by that is, yes, he's a lead system engineer with 3 years experience, but he has full accountability for his responsibilities. So he knows that it's a high standard, but he stepped up to it. He's doing a great job. We also have people that are 20 years experience. It's a mix, and I think all those kind of people bring great ideas to the table. But if I had someone come in as a new, say, propulsion engineer, if within a year they demonstrate a great deal of technical capability and maturity to lead a subsystem, they can get promoted to a lead. That's as simple as that.
All right. So next up, we have Cadet Master Sergeant Bryce Spain with the Newport News Composite Squadron in Virginia Wing. Master Sergeant Spain is the team captain for one of two teams competing in the Air Force Association's National High School Space Challenge, in which cadets design space missions using AGI's Systems Toolkit, STK. I don't know if you folks use it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And they're doing everything from orbital mechanics to designing payloads. So now, Master Sergeant Spain, I invite you to unmute your mic and go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, sir. Thank you for coming today.
Sure.
So my question for you is, from a leadership perspective, what is the most difficult part of your job?
Depends on what day. But I will say that it's, pulling off a mission like this, even at a big company, if I was still at Lockheed or at Northrop or one of the big companies, it's still a major challenge to land a spacecraft in another planetary body. There are a lot of things we don't know that we're learning, especially as a small company. So on any given day, there's numerous engineering challenges, there are budget challenges, there are schedule challenges, there are people challenges, there's all sorts of things that come up. But I think it's a matter of, to be a good leader, I think you have to respect your people and respect what they bring to the table, respect their ideas. And I think you have to be able to shift gears very quickly in a leadership mode. Like, I could go from handling a personnel issue to 15 minutes later sitting on a discussion about trajectories and orbital mechanics. You just have to be able to shift gears very quickly. But the challenges are every day. I mean, every day we have pressures. We're trying to launch the spacecraft next year, and there are a lot of people that are behind us, but also have high expectations. And so there's a lot of pressure to try to launch a spacecraft successfully and build it, test it. So I can't point to one thing. It's just so many things on any given day that are challenges. But I'll ask you a question too. As a team leader, what do you think are the biggest challenges you have?
For me, I have found that getting everybody to work together on a particular task can be challenging to accomplish a goal.
And how many people do you have on your team?
Not a lot, sir.
Okay. Yeah, getting everybody singly, focused on a common goal and a common mission can be challenging too. Sometimes it's like herding cats, but it's what I've done for a long time, and I feel it's one thing I know how to do well. But there's always challenges. It's never easy. But there's always that vision, the goal of landing a spacecraft. I always kind of envision that day, that moment when the spacecraft lands and we've done something that nobody's ever done before. And that's what motivates me to work through all the challenging days. And there are plenty of those, trust me. So thanks for your question.
Thank you, Cadet Spain. So now we've got a few other questions. Here's one from Major Lauren Wallace with Coastal Patrol Base 2 Memorial Composite Squadron in the Delaware Wing. And she wants to know about the number of robotic missions before manned spaceflight.
Before manned, am I still there?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay. Before manned spaceflight, I have to go back to that slide I had. So in the first manned mission really was the Russian Yuri Gagarin's mission in 1961. So not a lot of unmanned missions before that. But I couldn't tell you the number. Yeah, I mean, manned and unmanned have been interspersed as well. Even before the Apollo missions, there was the Surveyor missions, there was Luna missions, Russian Luna missions, and some other missions as well. But again, since 1972, there have been no American missions to the moon at all. No robotic missions, no manned missions, no human missions, nothing. So it's been 50 years, almost 50 years since America has been back to the moon. So we're really excited to lead the way. And frankly, we may not be the first. I mean, we're in a competition. There are other private companies like ours that are trying to do the same thing. And we want to be successful. Most important, we'd like to be first, but most important, we want to be successful because we're a business and we need to be able to sustain the business through successful landings and supporting our customers' missions.
Next, we have a question from Cadet Second Lieutenant Ethan Burks with Tidewater Composite Squadron, Virginia Wing. And he asked, what, if any, scientific instruments are going to be carried on the lander?
Yeah, so we have instruments. They're all, most of the scientific instruments are NASA instruments. And these are ones that have actually flown to the space station, been used on the space station. Some have been flown on free flyers that NASA's done. they're basically repurposed for our mission, and so they've been kind of slightly modified to fit on our spacecraft. But they're really there to do, again, measurements of the radiation environment. They want to measure the amount of dust in the atmosphere. And once we land, of course, we kick up a lot of dust. And there's an interest in understanding how the dust settles onto surfaces, how it affects instruments. There's also instruments to measure, understand the regolith, what's in the regolith. Is there, what type of, what's the composition? You know, is there ice water near where our landing site is? So a lot of different measurements of the environment and characterization of the environment. There's also one payload that is actually a different type of a cell, solar cell. So it's being tested on our mission to see how much power it can generate. So and there's a long list of other payloads that are in development or have been developed to do a variety of measurements and technology demonstrations.
Okay, now we've got another question. Are robots going to search the moon for rare metals?
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't think any of the instruments we have that we're flying right now are looking for those metals, but there are instruments being developed that for future missions would search for those metals because they could be mined and extracted and mined and converted into some sort of end product or sent back to Earth as well.
Do you happen to know the names of any of the companies that are looking at maybe doing that?
I do not. There are a lot of companies and NASA, of course, developing these kind of instruments, but I don't have any direct knowledge of who's doing that.
Okay. And our last question, it's a very interesting one. This is there any commercial interest in the area of space that is midway between Earth and the moon?
Yeah, so that's what we call cislunar space.
Yes.
And I don't know what the actual definition of the distance to cislunar space is, but this is what NASA is doing. They're developing and establishing what they call the Lunar Gateway, which is a space station-like module which will reside in cislunar space. And it'll be a place where astronauts can go to do experiments on that station itself. And then, you know, potentially even spacecraft like ours could do sortie missions down to the surface from that gateway. So that is something that's already being discussed, and there's already been contracts released by NASA to develop that gateway station. So yeah, absolutely, cislunar space is of interest as well, and we can fly there as well. If somebody wanted to drop off or deploy a payload or a spacecraft into that region, we could do that with our Peregrine and Griffin landers as well.
All right, that comes to the end of our questions. We thank you very, very much for coming out today. We know you've got a lot to do in the next year or so, and it was great for you to take time out of your busy day to come out and talk to us. And so we thank you again.
Happy to do it, and you know, we definitely want to have visitors to our new headquarters and to see us, you know, assembling and testing a spacecraft. Obviously, right now there's some restrictions due to the pandemic, but we hope that in the near future, you know, we can talk about getting some folks out to visit our real spacecraft assembly facility